This is a trigger warning. This episode does contain suicidal themes.
Good evening, listeners, and welcome to The Phantom Myth, the only radio show on this lonely isle that explores the origins of the local legends and the supernatural stories of our home. As you may remember, a few weeks ago we heard from a lady whose name we changed to Kira for privacy reasons about her roommate, who we called Beatrix. Again, Beatrix is not her real name. Now East Grave is a small island, and rumours spread fast. We've had a lot of people writing in asking about Beatrix's real identity. We can neither confirm nor deny any of this. Although I can tell you that Beatrix is soon to be transported to the mainland to await sentencing, and that, apparently, she has started to refer to herself as Beatrix, rather than her real name. I have not yet been allowed to talk to her, but I will keep you all updated as we learn more on this story. Today, I will be reading out a letter from Oscar Reinman, who has been working on the Carmilla, one of our many ships. For years, he has been part of the crew that provides our small island with fresh fish. Now, he claims that he has seen what lurks beneath the waves, and that it's not water, as you might expect. Dear Priscilla Phantom, I'm a fisherman, and I've been doing this job all my life. When I was a boy, my father worked on the ship named Carmilla. I used to imagine him at sea, at peace with the calm ocean, the sun beaming down and tanning his skin. Whatever time of year it was, he was always so much more tanned when he got back from a trip. Although after seeing the winters aboard this ship, I think I might just have been glimpsing my childhood memories through rose-tinted glasses. I always begged him to take me along. It seemed so much like an adventure, but when he finally did, I was disappointed. It was an old ship, still used sails and oars alongside the engine. There were under half a dozen men who worked on the ship, but the idea of being a fisherman lost much of its allure when I realised there was no lost islands to explore, no great sea beasts with which to battle, just sorting through the slimy, wiggly fish and separating them from the plastic and the filth of the ocean. They didn't even sing any songs, anything interesting songs anyway. Although I did learn some new words that my mother and my teachers had wished I hadn't learnt. Most of the time, I was mopping the deck or watching the rest of the crew as they hauled in another net full of fish. Sometimes, on long trips, they would play card games, which I didn't understand. Nobody wanted to teach me. Apparently, most of them were uncomfortable with teaching a 10-year-old how to gamble. So, after that first trip, I went off the idea of working on a ship until I was much older, and I began to find it fascinating again, just in a different way to before. I no longer held on to the fantasy of fighting krakens and giant monsters that lived in the deep, or meeting mermaids and going on adventures. When I was old enough, I began working on another ship called Harmony, where I stayed. One day, just as I had reached the shore after a long fishing trip, I received a call from my mum. Apparently my father had fallen over the side of the boat that he worked on, slipped into the water, hitting his head and knocking him unconscious as he went in. The crew found him and dragged him out and performed CPR, but he was dead for just under 2 minutes. She said that he was now awake and was insisting that he was fine, but she wanted to let me know. I visited him, and he seemed to be in good health, but distracted. He would stare off into the distance with unfocused eyes and an expression of grim determination set upon his face. I brought up the accident, and he looked at me, seemingly surprised that I was there at all. He said it was nothing, and he waved his hands flippantly. It was about a week later that I got a second call from my mum. This time her voice was shaky, and I could tell that she had been crying. She asked me to come over right away. So I left today's haul with Sam and Nathan, and I drove over, my mind racing as I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, maybe a bit too much. I remembered very little about the drive, except barely avoiding running over a dog. Thank goodness my car had good brakes. I walked up to the front door and tried the handle to find it unlocked. The door swung open to reveal my mum sitting on the sofa, crying. My sister was beside her. I will never forget the expressions on their faces. It was a picture of pure grief. My dad wasn't there. I noticed that right away. I scanned the room for him. His armchair sat empty, and the newspaper that he seemed to be permanently reading was closed and folded on the table. There was no noise of him rustling in the kitchen, or the overpowering scent of the cologne he always smothered himself in. The house just seemed emptier all of a sudden. My father committed suicide. There's no way I can veer around the fact. The crew said they saw him and he did it on purpose. He jumped over the side of the boat and dove down into the dark waters and never arose. It all happened so quickly that nobody could stop him. They couldn't even recover a body. He had just been left to float under the waves. My mum didn't deal with the news very well. She seemed lost. I think she blamed herself, as if there was something that she could have done. They had been married for 30 years, and she was suddenly all alone, and Dad was suddenly gone. And I think in some way she felt left behind. She began to refer to his death only by saying that he had left us. She seemed to be waiting for him to come back, though. My sister has 2 young children and a rather useless husband. Yes, Paul, I know you are listening to the radio. I don't think you're good enough for my sister, and this can't be news to you. Anyway, my sister had her hands full, so I moved back in with my mum to help around the house. I quite liked being back. It was nice, feeling as close to my mum as I did when I was a kid. I made tea every other night and asked her about her friends and her reading group. She seemed to be doing better, but I don't think she'll ever really recover from the shock of his death. And I guess I didn't either. His death left a void right in the centre of our family. Eventually, I decided I was ready to go back to work. But when I told my mum, she begged me to stay, to get another job. She insisted that working on a boat was not a safe job for this family. I assured her that I would be home in time to make us both my infamous spaghetti and meatballs, and I promised her that I would be careful. I was a fool. The first day back on the boat, I remember, as I leant over the side and stared down into the water lurking below me, that I could see my reflection and nothing else. The water was dark, darker than I remember it ever being before, so my face was distorted by the slight ripple of the waves and of the things that lurked beneath, appeared to be screaming. No matter how long I looked at the waves, this imperfect mirror showed only a face contorted with fear. Maybe this was just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe it was just a taste of what was to come. The sky was overcast, and only brief glimpses of the sun could be caught throughout the day. It all seemed fairly uneventful. Sam and Nathan were more talkative than usual. I suspect that they were trying to take my mind off my dad's passing. Sam told us about this woman he'd been seeing, gave us a little too much information, if I'm honest. Nathan started telling us about his infected toenail and his upset stomach, which neither I really wanted to hear, but as a distraction from my dad's death, I suppose it worked. If you've got the rather disgusting image of your friend's infected toes lodged in your brain, you're probably going to find it difficult to think of anything else, however much you want to. We had probably been on the boat for around 4 hours, and we were standing on the deck. Sam had been going into excruciating, vivid details of his exploits of the previous night, and I decided that now, before he got even more graphic, was the perfect time to go and clean the boat somewhere else. Anywhere else. So I went to go and search for that most elusive beast of them all, the mop. There was a specific cupboard for the cleaning supplies, but for some godforsaken reason Sam always left the mop in the bridge, and Nathan would leave it just about anywhere but the cupboard. I started to make my way inside to find the mop, but I must have slipped. I remember my feet sliding out from underneath me and being clobbered by the railings, and then just the freezing cold of the English sea all around me, soaking through my clothes and into my skin. I could swim. I knew how to swim, but I didn't. I don't think it even crossed my mind to start kicking my legs. Maybe it was the shock of being plunged into freezing cold water, but I just let the ocean drag me down and down until the world above was gone, and even the sun was out of sight and out of reach. Everything was dark. I didn't panic, even as I felt the last of the oxygen leave my lungs. Before me was a face. His skin was peeling, and his body was bloated. But he grinned inanely at me. His eyes glinted with a powerful madness of true comprehension. Behind the eyes, that was not my father, not anymore. And I understood. I understood everything. About myself and time and of the infinite cosmos and the equally infinite nothingness that lay beyond. It was there that I finally became who I always should have been, and known everything I should always have known. Under the waves, I saw it all. And it was all so obvious. I saw a square with 12 faces, 16 corners, and 48 edges. I saw every shape and dimension. My mind was free. We all think we learn and grow and become smarter in our world, but nothing could be further from the truth. The more we think we learn, the more our minds get shackled to our perception of reality, and the more closed we become to what is real and how everything truly works. I saw this world and the one beyond, and the next, and the next. I saw things that slithered through the worlds, and even more that lurked outside of them. I saw death, and I saw life, and I understood everything. I saw how one event affects another on a scale that you would never believe. The universe was made up of building blocks, so intricate, but so infinitely simple that you could build a whole new world simply just by rearranging them just a little. Much the same as a child can spell a word using the alphabet blocks and then rearrange them to create another. It all seemed so easy, so simple. Child's play. And then everything began to grow dark again. Every twinkle of light from every world faded from my view. But I still knew them. I still understood them. I was still a god. The world around me was dark and quiet, and I wandered through the nothingness, looking for understanding and looking for myself. There was a noise in this void. Noise could not, should not, travel in a void. Nothingness. Yet I heard a sound, a quiet, rhythmic beeping. I walked towards it, and as I did, the floor seemed to become muddier. Of course, it didn't. There was no floor, but the nothingness beneath me seemed to stick to the bottom of my shoes. Despite the fact that I no longer seemed to be wearing shoes, I wasn't entirely certain I had a physical presence at all anymore. The closer I got to the beeping, the more I seemed to melt into the void around me, becoming a part of it, becoming nothing at all. I was the void, the lack of light, the lack of dark. I was at peace. Almost. One niggling thought that I couldn't quite focus on, screaming at me in the back of my mind. My father's disappointed face flashed before my eyes. He looked angry and alone, but behind his eyes something was smiling. This was not my father. I heard it then. His voice in my ear, hissing at me. Open your eyes. The light flooded and washed away the void and the darkness and all that knowledge. I felt it all slip away, and now it's all gone. And I don't know what that means. I need to know what it all means. If I did, I could tell you the meaning of life. I could tell you who you were better than you could. I could predict everything. I could be omniscient. I could build and destroy and reshape worlds in my own image. But I can't. Like this, I'm useless. I'm a pathetic human stuck in this fragile body with its mortal limitations. I could be a god, but I'm nothing. The world stopped making any sense to me, and I felt my mind shrink and settle back into the cramped little box it had been in before. How could I ever live like this? How could I go on living like this? I couldn't remember exactly what it was that I had seen, but I certainly couldn't understand what I understood just a moment ago. My mind felt so small, so compressed. How could I go back to my job and my life after knowing what I had known? How could I carry on so utterly aware of my own insignificance? The constant, high-pitched bleeps still rang in my ears as my eyes adjusted to the light. There was a lady staring over me. Her face was one of shock. She shouted something, and the words were impossibly loud for my ears. I didn't try to understand what she said. Another lady came over, and she started talking to me. I shook my head without any idea of what I was saying no to. Apparently Sam and Nathan had managed to fish me out of the water, and Nathan performed CPR on me. My heart had stopped and I was legally dead for a minute and a half. My mum came to visit me later that day. She seemed worried, so I asked her what was bothering her. In turn, she asked me what I had seen beneath the waves. I told her that I had seen nothing. I mean, after all, what could I tell her without sounding completely insane? She seemed relieved, not by much though. She told me something about my father that I didn't know. She told me that the night before he died, he had opened up to her about what he had seen in the murky waters surrounding us. He told her that he saw something, a great beast that had shown him everything. He felt he had understood that which philosophers and scientists could not. But he didn't remember, not fully. My mum started crying as she told me that it had worried her slightly, but it also had filled her with hope. He seemed passionate, and she thought he would pick up a fascination with philosophy. She never thought he would do what he did. I watched my mum cry. I loved her. She was kind and maternal, and I had loved her. But as I watched her cry over my father, I will admit, I felt a distance. Not just from her, but from my life. It felt like my memories belonged to another. I had loved this woman and I wished her well. She was certainly a mother and she always would be. But she no longer felt like my mother. This life does not feel like my life. And my home does not feel like my home. And my body does not feel like my body. For an instant, I was a god. A part of me is still lost, taken by the sea, left to float beneath the waves, and without it, I am nothing. I feel nothing. Oscar. This certainly is a worrying story. First, I should tell you that no matter how lost you feel, the answer is to look for comfort with your friends and your loved ones. Not to do anything drastic, and certainly do not follow in the footsteps of your father. Therapy also never hurts, and it can help start the healing process. Now, as I remember telling Mr. Numbness is not often a sign that you've lost a part of yourself, but it does happen when you're in shock. Mr. Ryman, you've been through a lot. Your father passed, and you drowned. Also, having the same vivid dreams as your father may seem like either a supernatural occurrence or an insanely unlikely coincidence. But I assure you that there is a rational explanation for everything. I think it is likely that he did tell you what he saw, and your grief-stricken mind blocked it out, only for it to return in your own subconsciousness. Lastly, I should make it very clear that although nothing otherworldly happened here, the sea is dangerous, and you should take care whether you are out in a boat or just swimming in the sea. No monsters lurk beneath the waves, but make sure that you don't swim out too far or run on the deck of a boat. Don't sail in choppy seas, and don't dive down under the water to look for whatever you think is there. You are not immortal just because you haven't died yet. Be careful and sleep well, dear listeners.
The voice of Priscilla Phantom is Lindsay Evans. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Phantom Myth. Hope you enjoyed it. After the latest update, you'll find that listening to this show no longer results in uncontrollable soul loss. Have a fun day. If you did enjoy this episode, and most importantly, if you can afford to, you can send donations to the Phantom Myth PayPal page. There should be a link in the description. Thank you.